everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know every time I post a new video. This week we are going to be talking about the solved case of Carlie Brucia. She was a young girl who just suddenly vanished one day in early 2004 as she was walking home. When an investigation into her disappearance began, the police started looking into several different lines of inquiry in a search for clues as to what might have happened to Carlie, but nothing could prepare detectives for what they would find as they looked through some surveillance footage from a CCTV camera along Carlie's route home. It was after going through this footage when the police realised that Carlie had been abducted, and her abduction had actually been caught on camera. Just before we get into the case, please listen carefully to the following. This video is about the murder of a young girl and it involves heavy themes such as violence towards a child and the rape and sexual assault of a child. Viewer discretion is advised. So for this week's case, we are going back to February of 2004 in Sarasota, which is a city located in the state of Florida in the US. And this is 11-year-old Carlie Brucia. Her full name was Carlie Jane Brucia. She was born on the 16th of March 1992. Her parents were called Joe and Susan, however they were no longer together by the time this case took place. They had separated and Carlie lived with her mum in Sarasota. But she still had a very close relationship with her father Joe. He lived in Long Island, New York, so Carlie would often go and stay with him and his side of the family during school holidays and over Christmas, which she loved. She always had such an amazing time when she was with her dad and her aunts said that they just loved spoiling Carlie. They loved surprising her with lots of presents at Christmas and they just loved spending time with her in general. I can imagine that because they lived so far away from her most of the time, because they didn't get to see her as often as they would have liked, it just made the time that they did get with her even more special and enjoyable. But yeah, as I said, for the most part, Carlie lived with her mum Susan in Sarasota in Florida, and also her mum's partner Stephen, who obviously became Carlie's stepfather. And Carlie also had a little brother whom she lived with too. He was a couple of years younger than her and she was also very close with them. She was very close with her mum Susan, and as far as I'm aware, Carlie just had a very normal life for an 11-year-old girl. She was in the 6th grade at school. She went to the McIntosh Middle School in Sarasota. She had a lot of friends and she was described as being just a very happy young girl. She was very kind and caring and she was rarely seen without a smile on her face. The date was the 1st of February 2004. It was a Sunday. It was actually Super Bowl Sunday, and that day Carlie Brucia was at her friend Danielle's house. She had actually stayed there the night before. She and Danielle had had a sleepover and Carlie had spent most of her Sunday at Danielle's house with Danielle and her family. I think she intended to watch the Super Bowl game with them that evening. However, she didn't in the end. Shortly before the game was about to begin, Carlie said goodbye to Danielle and her family and she said that she was going to go back to her house. She was going to walk home. Now, Carlie's home was only about a mile away from Danielle's house, so it wasn't a long walk, and she said that she would be fine walking back on her own. And so she left. This was around 6:15 p.m. that evening. However, Danielle's mother, her name was Connie, she decided to ring Carlie's mother Susan shortly after Carlie left, just to let her know that Carlie was on her way home. She's just started walking and she should be home soon. But I don't think Susan was too comfortable with Carlie walking on her own, because even though it was a short journey, she was only 11 years old. So Susan asked her partner Stephen, Carlie's stepfather, if he could go out in the car and meet Carlie along her route, if he could go and pick her up. And so he did. He left in his car. However, as Stephen was driving around, he couldn't see Carlie anywhere. He was driving along the route that she would have walked along to get home, along a road called Bee Ridge Road, but she was nowhere to be seen. And Carlie's mum, Susan, immediately just started to panic because, as I said, the walk home was a short one. So if Stephen couldn't find her along the route, then where was she? Where had she gone in such a short space of time? Susan was so worried that something bad had happened to her daughter. I think Susan and Stephen waited for a little while to see if Carlie would turn up, and in that time Susan was calling all of Carlie's friends just to check that she wasn't with any of them. Perhaps she decided to go to another friend's house as she was walking home. However, none of her friends had any idea where she was, and so at around 7:30 p.m. Susan picked up the phone and she called 911 to report her 11-year-old daughter as missing. And Susan was just a mess. As you can imagine, she was crying on the phone to the police. She was just so hysterical and fearful, as any mother, any parent would be. And obviously, because Carlie was just 11 years old, she was a child, the police jumped into action straight away to try and find her. Officers were sent to her home to speak to her mum and stepfather, and they told them that Carlie had been walking back from her friend Danielle's house that evening. So officers also went to speak to Danielle and her family. As well as that, they started conducting door-to-door inquiries in the area, asking if anyone had seen her. They got in touch with Carlie's other friends, like Susan did, asking if Carlie was with any of them, but of course she wasn't. And the police also very quickly put out a BOLO, a be on the lookout alert, so that other police forces knew that this child from Sarasota was missing and to keep an eye out for her. This was a very fast-paced investigation. The police were putting out all the stops, doing everything that they could to locate Carlie. In addition to those other lines of inquiry, officers were also just out searching for her, searching around the neighborhood, but unfortunately that night they didn't find anything. There was no sign of Carlie and no indication of where she might have gone. Now, the following day was obviously the 2nd of February 2004, and it was a Monday, so it would have been a school day for Carlie. And even though she still hadn't returned home, I think everyone was hoping that maybe she would turn up to school that morning. Maybe she had just been with a friend and she would come into school. However, she didn't. And I can imagine that for a lot of people, for a lot of her family and friends, it probably really hit home then that this was serious. Carlie really was a missing person. She was potentially in danger. That same morning, the police brought in sniffer dogs to assist with the investigation. They had the dogs sniff Carlie's pillowcase so that they knew her scent, and then the police were going to walk with these dogs along Carlie's probable route home from Danielle's house in an attempt to trace her last steps. So they were walking along Bee Ridge Road, and the dogs tracked Carlie's scent all the way to a car wash just off of Bee Ridge Road. I believe it was next to a side street, which was a shortcut route to Carlie's house. So perhaps she intended to walk along this shortcut. They could smell Carlie's scent in the parking lot of this car wash, but then the dog seemed to lose her scent near the rear end of the car wash. So this seemed interesting. This indicated that perhaps something had happened to her while she was walking past this car wash, because the dogs kind of abruptly lost her scent here. So the detectives approached the owner of the car wash and they asked if they could have the footage from the business's CCTV cameras, and they also asked for CCTV footage from other businesses and establishments near the car wash too. Obviously they were hoping to spot Carlie on it so that they could figure out where she had gone. But I mean, the car wash itself had a number of motion cameras which captured different angles and different areas around it. So the police were going through the footage from each one, which was captured on the evening that Carlie vanished. Specifically, they were looking around the time frame of like 6:20 p.m. because this was shortly after she left Danielle's house, and this was the time that the police estimated she probably would have reached the car wash. And when they looked through the footage from the camera which faced the rear of the car wash, sure enough, they spotted Carlie on it. At 6:21 p.m, Carlie was seen walking through the parking lot. She was wearing the same clothes that she had on when she left Danielle's, and she looked pretty normal. She appeared to be, I think, listening to music on her Walkman, so she seemed fine. Or at least that was until a man approached her. An unidentified man was seen walking up to Carlie on this footage. He appears to grab her arm. He speaks to her for a few moments and then he leads her away. He still had a hold of her arm and he pulled her and made her walk with him. And it was when the detectives watched this footage when they started to think, we've just witnessed an abduction. This man, whoever he was, appears to have abducted Carlie Brucia, and it was caught on camera. It was clear that Carlie did not want to go with this person. It didn't seem like she was going with him willingly at all. I mean, for starters, if you watch the beginning of the footage again, when Carlie and this man first come into view of the camera, Carlie is not even looking at him. She appears to be looking down at her Walkman. She's not paying him any attention, as if she intends to just walk straight past him. It's obviously the man who diverts straight to her and grabs her arm. So it seemed very likely that he may have been a complete stranger to her, and of course it's unlikely that she would go anywhere voluntarily with a man that she didn't know. But also it looked like she didn't go with him willingly, because the detectives believe that this man may have threatened Carlie with a weapon. Shortly after he approached Carlie and he grabbed her arm, the detectives noticed that this man put his hand in his pocket. He didn't pull anything out, but the detectives believe that he may have told Carlie that he had a gun or a knife or something in his pocket, and that if she didn't come with him, he would use it. He would hurt her, possibly even kill her. And so, terrified, she did what he said. She started walking with him. So now the police had this absolutely huge lead. It seemed as though this man on the CCTV footage was the one responsible for Carlie's disappearance. So they had to find him, find out who he was. And did Carlie know him, or was he a stranger to her? As part of the investigation, the police did look into the people in Carlie's life, trying to determine whether anyone she knew could have been involved in whatever had happened to her. And one of the men that they looked closely at was her stepfather, Stephen. The police had to consider him a person of interest. It is just kind of standard procedure when someone goes missing or is murdered for the police to look at those who are closest to the victim. So Stephen was brought in to be questioned. The police asked where he was at the time of his stepdaughter's disappearance, and he said that he was at home with Carlie's mum, Susan. And then when Danielle's mum called saying that Carlie had started to walk home alone, as we know, Stephen went out in his car looking for her, but he never found her. And he told the police that he was on the phone to his partner Susan pretty much the whole time that he was driving around, which could be confirmed when the police checked his cell phone records. Ultimately, the police were confident that Stephen was innocent and that he was telling the truth, and so he was ruled out as a suspect, but not before he mentioned someone else to the police. Stephen told them of another man that he thought the detectives might want to look into further, and that man was Ron Shockett. And Ron was actually Danielle's stepfather. If you remember, Danielle was the friend whose house Carlie had been staying at on the day that she went missing. Ron was in a relationship with Danielle's mother. Stephen told the police that whilst he was driving around that evening looking for Carlie, he kept seeing this red pickup truck driving up and down Bee Ridge Road, and it even drove into the car wash parking lot a few times. It was just driving up and down Bee Ridge Road constantly. And then shortly after this, when Stephen went to Danielle's house to double check that Carlie wasn't still there, he noticed this same red pickup truck parked outside. It was Ron's truck that he had just seen driving up and down Bee Ridge Road. Stephen was sure of it. So the police began thinking that maybe Ron Shockett was the one who abducted Carlie that evening at the car wash. I mean, in the police's opinion, he did kind of match the description of the unidentified man in the CCTV footage. So Ron was brought in to be interviewed. They showed him a picture from the car wash CCTV camera of Carlie being led away by a man, and they even said to Ron, "That man kind of looks like you." And Ron agreed, actually. He said, "I mean, yeah, it kind of does, but it's it's not me. Ron also admitted that he was driving up and down Bee Ridge Road at the time that Stephen saw his red pickup truck, but he said that the reason he was doing that was because he too was looking for Carlie. Clearly he had been informed that Carlie was missing, and so he also went out to look for her, to look for his stepdaughter's friend. So the detectives asked Ron where he actually was at the time that Carlie vanished that day, around 6:20 p.m. and he said that he was at work. He worked for a tow truck company in Sarasota. So the detectives went to speak with his colleagues to ask if they could confirm this, and they could. They said, yep, Ron was here at 6:20 p.m. So he seemed to have a strong alibi. But just to be sure, the police also searched his red pickup truck just to see if there was any evidence in there which indicated that Carlie had been inside his vehicle. But they found nothing. So just like Stephen, Ron too was eventually eliminated from police inquiries. The police showed the CCTV footage of Carlie and that man to Carlie's family, to her mum Susan, and though she could confirm that the girl on the tape was her daughter, Susan said that she had absolutely no idea who the man that took her was. She didn't recognize him at all. So identifying this man was proving to be difficult for the police. He really did seem to be a stranger to Carlie, because if Carlie's own mother doesn't recognize him, then it's more than likely that Carlie didn't know him either. But after going over the CCTV footage again and again and again, the detectives did notice a small detail about this man's appearance that they thought could help identify him. Firstly, they noticed that the clothing he was wearing, it looked like a grey work uniform jumpsuit kind of thing, perhaps the kind of uniform that a mechanic might wear. And when this man turned around as he was walking away with Carlie, the detectives also noticed that on his uniform there appeared to be a name patch or a name tag. Now the police zoomed in on this name tag as best they could, and they were able to tell that there were 3 letters on it, but unfortunately it was just too blurry to be able to make out what these letters were, what the name on this tag was. They tried desperately to enhance it and make it a bit clearer using special software, but sadly they had no luck. They just could not make out the name on this man's uniform, and so the police turned to the media and the public for help. Very quickly Carlie's case was all over the news, and the police released the CCTV footage from the car wash where Carlie's abduction was caught on camera. Of course, the detectives were hoping that someone out there would recognize the man that took Carlie and come forward with his name. And they received so many calls from the public. Literally thousands and thousands of calls came in with potential tips and leads and names. So it was going to be a big task for the police to go through each one and determine whether or not it was a line of inquiry that they wanted to pursue. But 2 days after Carlie disappeared, on the morning of the 3rd of February 2004, the police received this one call from a member of the public that they decided to investigate further. The call came from a man who I believe was called Ed, and he said that he was pretty damn sure that the unidentified male on the CCTV footage was someone that he knew. Ed said that he believed that it was actually his business partner, a man named Joseph Smith. And he said that he believed this because he recognized the clothes that the man was wearing on the footage as being the uniform that Joseph wore to work. Joseph was a mechanic, by the way. And also he said that he could tell just from the way that the man walked on the footage. He said that that was the exact way that Joseph walked. So the police decided to look more into this Joseph Smith. They discovered that he was 37 years old at the time that this case took place. He lived locally, he was a father, he had 3 children, although he didn't live with his kids because he was separated from their mother. Sources state that Smith had a lengthy criminal record dating back more than 10 years. According to one source, he had been arrested about 13 times before for crimes such as kidnapping and false imprisonment, and I believe he'd also been arrested a number of times for drug-related offences. In fact, after doing a background check, the police found that at the time of Carlie's abduction, Joseph Smith was on probation for drug offences, and apparently just the year before he had violated the terms of his parole twice on 2 occasions, but despite this, he wasn't remanded for some reason. Now, the police also discovered that at the time this case occurred, Joseph Smith drove a brown Lincoln car. So with this in mind, the detectives decided to go back through the footage from the CCTV cameras in and around the car wash to see if they could spot a brown Lincoln, because then that was evidence to say that he was in the area near the abduction scene around the time that Carlie was taken. However, when they did this, they didn't see one. They didn't see a brown Lincoln anywhere. One car that they did see on the footage quite a few times though was this light-coloured Buick station wagon. It was actually seen pulling into the car wash parking lot just 3 minutes before Carlie was approached and led away by that man. And it was also seen driving along Bee Ridge Road. So the police tried to enhance the image to get a clearer picture of the car to try and see who was driving it or what the license plate was, but unfortunately, again, just like the name tag on the uniform, they were unsuccessful with this. It was too blurry. Now, despite the fact that this Buick station wagon wasn't the car that Joseph Smith drove, and despite the fact that they couldn't yet tie him to the crime scene, the police were still very interested in looking more into Joseph Smith as a potential suspect in the case, and so they went to visit him. They went to his address. He actually rented a room from a married couple named Jeffrey and Mimi Pincus. So they went to his home, they started asking Joseph some questions, they showed him the picture of the CCTV footage, and he denied being the man on it. He said that it wasn't him. He said that it kind of looked like him, but that it wasn't him. And so they asked Joseph where he was during the Super Bowl game on Sunday evening, which was obviously the time that Carlie went missing. And he said that he was just at home the whole time. And so the detectives asked if they could have a look around his room and also his car, his brown Lincoln, which he allowed them to do. He said, yeah, that was fine. But they didn't really find anything significant in his room. They did find a couple of Joseph's mechanic uniforms. He had these grey coloured mechanic jumpsuits in his closet, and they had a name tag on them which read Joe, which kind of stood out to the police because if you recall from earlier, when they zoomed into the CCTV footage, they believed that they could see 3 letters on Carlie's abductor's name tag. They couldn't make out what the letters were, but they believed that it was 3 letters, and Joseph Smith had 3 letters on his name tag. But I mean, apart from that, they didn't really find anything, no solid evidence to prove that Joseph Smith was involved in whatever had happened to Carlie. Now, the police were able to speak to one of Joseph's landlords whilst they were at the property. They spoke to Mimi Pincus, and she was able to confirm Joseph's story. She said that yes, he was at home on the Sunday evening at the time of the Super Bowl, so he seemed to have a strong alibi, and so he was more or less ruled out as a suspect in Carlie's case. But that didn't stop the police from arresting Joseph Smith, because you see, when they had to look through his car, they discovered drug paraphernalia in there. So they arrested him and took him into custody for violating terms of his parole. And the investigation into Carlie Brucia's case continued. The police carried on looking into other men, other potential people of interest, or at least that was until later that day. Later the same day that the police spoke to and arrested Joseph Smith, his other landlord, Jeffrey Pincus, so Mimi's husband, he came into the police station at around 7 p.m. that evening, and he actually told the police that his wife Mimi accidentally gave the police false information. As I mentioned, she initially confirmed Joseph's alibi. She said that yes, he was at home on the Sunday evening when Carlie Brucia was abducted. However, when her husband Jeffrey came to the station later that day, he said that his wife was mistaken. She had gotten confused and she had gotten the time wrong because, I mean, she herself was really busy that night because she was babysitting her grandchild. So she wasn't really focusing on what Joseph was doing. She was focusing on her grandkid. Jeffrey told the police that actually Joseph Smith wasn't at the house that evening. Jeffrey said that he left the house at around 3 p.m. and he was out all evening. So now Joseph Smith didn't seem to have an alibi anymore for the time that Carlie disappeared. It seemed as though he had previously lied to the police. But that wasn't all that his landlord Jeffrey told the detectives. He also informed them that before Joseph left the house on the day that Carlie went missing, he asked Jeff if he could borrow his vehicle. I don't know why he couldn't use his own, but yeah, he wanted to use Jeff's car for some reason. And Jeff said, yeah, okay. So Joseph grabbed the keys and he left with Jeff's car. And guess what car Jeffrey drove? It was a light tan-coloured Buick station wagon. The exact same car that the police spotted on CCTV cameras on Bee Ridge Road and pulling into the car wash parking lot just minutes before Carlie Brucia was abducted. So now not only did Joseph Smith not have an alibi anymore, but the police now had proof that he was out driving that evening in a car that they could place at the abduction scene. Evidence against this man was mounting. Another thing Jeff told the police was that Joseph left the house that day wearing his grey mechanic uniform, the same kind of grey uniform that the man on the CCTV footage was wearing. And he also told the detectives that when Joe asked if he could use the car, he said that he would only be about 15 minutes. He would be back in 15. However, it turns out that he did not return the car to Jeffrey until the following morning. And when he did return it, it looked completely different. The inside of the car was completely different. Jeffrey said that Joseph had moved the back seat down, he'd moved things all over the place for some reason. So the police started thinking that maybe he did that because he abducted Carlie and he put her in the back of the station wagon, so he needed to make room. So of course, after receiving this information from Jeff Pincus, Joseph Smith very quickly became the #1 suspect in the case. The police were now sure that he was the one who kidnapped Carlie that day and possibly killed her. Unfortunately, it was looking likely that that was the direction the case was headed in. Even though Carlie was still technically a missing person, as time went by, I think everyone started to lose hope that she would be found alive, and they started to believe that she had probably been murdered. So Joseph Smith was brought in to be questioned by the police. However, he would not admit to anything. In fact, he pretty much asked for a lawyer straight away and said that he was not going to answer any questions. And so whilst he waited for a lawyer, he was sent back to jail where he was still being held for the drug paraphernalia charges and violating his parole. And whilst he was in jail, he spoke a lot with his brother John. They spoke a lot, I think, via letters and on the phone. And although Joseph Smith was refusing to cooperate with or admit anything to the police, it seemed as though one person he did begin opening up to was his brother, because John Smith actually contacted the police and he told them that his brother had just confessed to him whilst on the phone that he was the man on the CCTV footage. He was the one who abducted Carlie Brucia, and he told John that after he kidnapped her, he sexually assaulted her and then killed her. Apparently, Joseph also told his mother on the phone about what he had done, but he told her that it was an accident. He accidentally abducted Carlie and sexually assaulted her and killed her. And Joseph also told his brother John what he did with Carlie's body, where he hid her after killing her. He told John that he left Carlie's body in a wooded area behind a nearby church on Proctor Road in Sarasota. So the police and forensic teams immediately went to this location. They started looking around the woods, and sure enough, they found Carlie. She was found lying on the ground. She was on her back. She had marks on her wrist where it's believed she was bound, and a ligature mark around her neck where Joseph strangled her to death. And I believe she was also partially nude. She was naked from the waist down, apart from one sock that she was wearing, and this was from where Joseph Smith had raped her. The police's theory as to what happened that day is as follows. Joseph Smith asked his landlord Jeffrey if he he could borrow his station wagon. He started driving around the area whilst also taking a load of different drugs at the same time, and it was whilst he was driving along Bee Ridge Road when he spotted 11-year-old Carlie Brucia as she was walking home. And as soon as he saw her, he decided that he was going to abduct her. So it's believed that he pulled into the parking lot of the car wash first, but then after realizing that Carlie had walked around the back of the car wash, he decided to drive back out of the parking lot and down a side road instead, where I guess he could get to her quicker. He then parked his car, jumped out, and then, as we know, a CCTV camera catches him approaching Carlie and leading her away. As I mentioned earlier, it's thought that after grabbing her arm, he probably threatened Carlie and told her that he had either a gun or a knife in his pocket and that she had to come with him without making a fuss, otherwise he would hurt her, and so she did. He took her back to the station wagon, and following this, he sexually assaulted and killed her before taking her body to the woods behind the church where he dumped her. And it wasn't just the CCTV footage and the account from his landlord Jeffrey and his brother John which implicated him. The authorities would also eventually obtain forensic evidence which too linked him to the crime. Firstly, they found evidence in the station wagon that Joseph was driving that day. According to sources, they found 2 of Carlie's head hairs in the car, and they also found 7 fibres in there which matched the shirt that she was wearing that day. So this evidence proved that she had been in that vehicle, and they also discovered traces of semen on Carlie's shirt, which when tested were found to have been a match to Joseph Smith. So Joseph Smith was arrested, and on the 20th of February 2004, he was charged with first-degree murder as well as kidnapping and capital sexual battery. And despite previously confessing to his brother John, he actually decided to plead not guilty, which meant that this case was headed to trial. Smith's trial began in November of 2005, and it went on for about 10 days before the jury returned with a verdict of guilty, and they voted 10-2 for the death penalty. And on the 15th of March 2006, that is exactly what he was given. Smith was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the kidnapping and sexual battery convictions, and he was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder conviction. And during his sentencing, Judge Andrew Owens said, quote, "Carlie endured unspeakable trauma which began at the time of her kidnapping. The image of the defendant taking her arm and leading her away will no doubt forever be etched in our minds. During the sexual and physical abuse Carlie was subjected to at 11 years of age, there is no doubt that she was aware of her dire predicament and that she had little or no hope of survival. Her death was conscienceless and pitiless, calculated and premeditated." Now, about 13 years after Joseph Smith received the death penalty, in July of 2017, Smith's death sentence was basically revoked. It was vacated by County Court Judge Charles Roberts after a new bill was signed in Florida which ruled that a unanimous jury verdict is required in order to impose the death penalty. And obviously the jury in this case voted 10-2, so his death sentence was cancelled, but then just a couple of years later, in April of 2020, it was reinstated. He was handed back the death penalty. However, he passed away before his execution date was even announced. On the 26th of July 2021, Joseph Smith died while still on death row at the Union Correctional Institution in Florida, and he was 55 years old. And I actually don't know how he died. As far as I'm aware, his cause of death has never been released. Now, a lot of people believe that Joseph Smith may have had even more victims than just Carlie. In particular, he is suspected to have killed a young woman named Tara Reilly. She was murdered in the year 2000, and her body was discovered in a retention pond behind a Walmart in the city of Bradenton in Florida. Unfortunately, her case remains unsolved to this day. However, as I said, many people believe that Joseph Smith could have been responsible for her death. In fact, even Joseph's own brother John has said that he thinks Joseph may have killed Tara, but there was never sufficient evidence to prove it, so he couldn't be charged in relation attention to that crime. Some more heartbreaking news is that in April of 2017, Carlie's mother Susan tragically passed away. Susan became addicted to drugs following her daughter's death as a way to try and cope with her pain and her loss, and according to reports, about 6 months after Carlie's death, Susan's son, Carlie's younger brother, he was taken away from his mum. Susan lost custody of him because of her drug use. And then, as I said, in April of 2017, she sadly passed away. She died as the result of a heroin overdose. In the aftermath of Carlie's murder, a new bill named after Carlie, called Carlie's Law, was put forward with the aim of basically amending existing laws in order to toughen parole rules for sex offenders and also to notify parents when there is criminal activity near their homes. But unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, nothing actually came of this. Apparently the law failed to pass Congress in 2004, so it was reintroduced in 2005, but nothing has really been said about it since. Sources just state that no further information has been made available, which is a huge shame. I mean, any laws that can tighten the parole rules for sex offenders and make it more difficult for them to offend again is a good law to have. It may not necessarily have made a difference in this specific case because at the time of Carlie's murder, Joseph Smith was on probation for other crimes that he had committed, not sexual offences. But who knows, it could have made a huge difference when it came to protecting other children from other sex offenders. But as I said, unfortunately, I don't think anything ever ended up really happening with Carlie's Law. But that concludes this case. That is the case of Carlie Brucia. Carlie's story is absolutely heart-wrenching and terrifying. I think the judge was pretty spot on in his statement at Smith's sentencing. I know for sure that that harrowing CCTV footage of Carlie being abducted by Smith will never leave me. But yeah, that is it for this case. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on the case in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you guys think, and also feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye!